Good afternoon. Welcome to the Labor Forum here on WRFG 89.3 FM. My name is Diane Mathowitz. I'm a retired auto worker. And with me in the studio is Paul McLennan. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Diane.
He is a retired Transit Workers Union. And we are both co-hosting today's program. We want to wish everyone a joyous day celebrating the legacy and struggles of Dr. Martin Luther King and the movement that struggled so hard to win some basic rights in this country. And we want to especially talk about how that struggle is continuing. We're going to start off with our labor. Oh, before I begin, I always forget this. I have to tell people that the opinions expressed on this program may not necessarily be those of the Board of Directors, staff, or volunteers here at WRFG. And I also want to make sure you know that the song that starts this program off is by John Fromer called We Do the Work, and it's by a CD of the same title. And I love that song, and I hope you do too. It always has my toe tapping, getting ready to share some good news. So we're going to start off with our labor headlines. And so from international labor news, we have an example of worldwide solidarity. On Friday, January 16th, union workers at two giant cement companies, Holcim, I think that's how it's pronounced, it's spelled Holcim, and Lafarge, coordinated global actions to demand guarantees of worker rights following the announcement of a corporate merger between the two businesses. The Swiss-based Holcim and French Lafarge have a combined 130,000 workers in plants and facilities in Germany, Jordan, Lebanon, the Philippines, Romania, India, Serbia, Belgium, Brazil, Cambodia, Egypt, Greece, Italy, the Netherlands, and Thailand, in addition to their home countries. Tens of thousands of workers are likely to be laid off or see changes in their jobs, pay, and working conditions. Yet despite laws requiring participation in the unions in discussions and decisions affecting their memberships, the workers remain left out. The January 16th coordinated actions included work stoppages, picket lines, rallies, leafletings, press conferences, and other types of protest. According to union leaders, the workers are united and clear. There will be no merger without worker rights. Here in the United States, on January 11th, rank-and-file auto workers picketed the North American International Auto Show in Detroit for the 7th consecutive year. I remember seeing some of the coverage of this huge exhibit of shiny automobiles with reports of record profits and sales for the giant auto companies in 2014, but I didn't see any mention of the workers who built those cars who were demonstrating outside. That's why you listen to the Labor Forum. With the UAW contracts with Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler expiring this September, auto workers want an end to the concessions that have resulted in no or very small pay raises since 2005. 2005? 9 years. Actually, 10 years this fall. The two-tier wage system that pays workers hired after October 2007 2/3 or less than higher seniority workers, the use of temp workers who make even less, and so-called alternative work schedules that cram 40-hour work weeks into 4 ever-changing days and shifts. Other issues raised by the auto workers related to vehicle safety, climate change, and solidarity with fired, injured Colombian GM workers, all issues of the corporations putting profit before people. And lastly, there has been a lot of local news concerning the suspension first and then the firing of Atlanta Fire Chief Calvin Cochran, following his distribution to a number of firefighters of his self-published book detailing his Christian fundamentalist beliefs. His interpretation of Christian teachings included biased remarks about women, Jewish people, gay and transgender people, and are contrary to city non-discrimination policies. This matter came to light as a result of complaints from firefighters concerned about the impact of his extreme views on their jobs and the morale of their fellow firefighters. The following is a statement by the Atlanta Firefighters Union. It reads, Atlanta Professional Firefighters Local 134 would like to commend Mayor Reed and his administration for their decision to terminate Fire Chief Calvin Cochran. Local 134 supports LGBTQ rights and equality among all employees. Atlanta professional firefighters believe we should take this opportunity to work with the City Council and the Reed administration to improve LGBTQ rights by adding an LGBTQ liaison for the fire department. We look forward to working with the City Council and Mayor and hope to provide any assistance they need going forward." Close quote. Cochran's case is being used to support the passage in the Georgia General Assembly of something called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which would have bolstered his right to disseminate his intolerant views among his employees. And those are our labor headlines for today, January 19th. We'll move on to a new exciting chapter in labor history from Paul.
Thanks, Diane. We have one other event to recognize this week, besides talking about the celebration of Dr. King's birthday. On January 18th, 1958, the Lumbee Indians drove the Ku Klux Klan from Robeson County, North Carolina. The Lumbee tribe is the largest tribe in North Carolina and the largest tribe east of the Mississippi River. During the previous year, Klan Grand Dragon James W. Cole, an evangelist and radio preacher in South Carolina, began to harass the Lumbee Indians and other minorities of Robeson County. His objective was to build up the Klan in the state. On January 13, 1958, a group burned a cross on the lawn of a Lumbee woman in the town of St. Paul's, North Carolina, as a warning because she was dating a white man. The Klan also burned a cross on the lawn of a Lumbee family who had moved into a white neighborhood. Cole announced plans for a Klan rally on January 18, 1958. On the night of the rally, only 50 to 100 Klansmen arrived at the private field, most armed with rifles or small arms. Before Cole began speaking, over 500 Lumbee men, many armed with sticks or guns, appeared and encircled the assembled Klansmen. First, the Lumbee shot out the one light, then began yelling and attacked. They shot their guns into the air. 4 Klansmen were lightly wounded. With the light out, the remaining Klansmen fled the scene, leaving family members, the public address system, an unlit cross, and various Klan regalia behind. James Cole reportedly left his wife behind and escaped through a nearby swamp. Afterward, the Lumbee celebrated by holding up the abandoned KKK banner. Many local, state, and national newspapers covered the event and captured photos of Lumbee burning the regalia and dancing around an open fire in nearby Pemberton, which is now a suburb of Raleigh. North Carolina Governor Luther H. Hodges denounced the Klan in a press statement. Cole was prosecuted, convicted, and served a 2-year sentence for inciting a riot. Since then, the Lumbee celebrate the day of the Battle of Hayes Pond annually as a holiday. Thereafter, the Klan ceased its activities in Robeson County, North Carolina. Next, we want to take a moment to recognize the legacy of Dr. King and his radical views on labor, capitalism, and this country's foreign policy. In 1965, speaking about the role of labor, Dr. King said, "The labor movement was the principal force that transformed misery and despair into hope and progress. Out of its bold struggles, economic and social reform gave birth to unemployment insurance, old age pensions, government relief for the destitute, and above all, new wage levels that meant not mere survival, but a tolerable life. The captains of industry did not lead this transformation. They resisted it until they were overcome." Dr. King also had a critique of the present economic system where today we see such tremendous economic inequality. For example, the average family makes less money today than they were making a generation ago. 15% of the U.S. population, nearly 47 million people, live beneath the official poverty rate of $24,000 per year for a family of 4. Roughly 18 million more are near poor, living within 130% of the poverty line, and 20% of all American children live in poverty. Here in Atlanta, we have the widest income gap between rich and poor of all major U.S. cities. In a 1966 speech to his staff, Dr. King said, "We are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. Call it what you may, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all of God's children. Finally, Dr. King delivered his historic Beyond Vietnam speech on April 4th, 1967, a year to the day before he was assassinated in Memphis. In this speech, he called the United States the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. He also said, "I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor, so long as adventures like Vietnam continued to draw men and skills and money like some demonic, destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such." He continued, "I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." Dr. King said, "We must move past indecision to action. We must find new ways to speak for peace in Vietnam and justice throughout the developing world, a world that borders on our doors. If we do not act, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time, reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world."
Thank you, Paul. It's almost as though one can turn any page in any book of Dr. King's speeches and just be just so struck with both the truth for today and the eloquence and the way he was able to put it all together. So I appreciate that. So folks, in the studio we have Harris Raynor with us today, and I have to say that all three of us who are seated in the studio, as well as Ozzy Ibrahimi, who's doing our video, we've all just come from the King March, and so we're kind of a little, well, we're tired, but it's a good tired. Okay. And we're really happy Harris is here with us because there's so many exciting developments among workers. We tell you about it every Monday on this program, whatever country it's in, and certainly here in Atlanta, and certainly among low-wage workers. Harris is involved in the struggle of the airport workers, as well as a number of other places where low-wage workers are concentrated. But there was an action out at the Atlanta airport this past week, and that was sort of the cause or the reason we decided to get an update about what's happening with the airport. So I want to introduce to you Harris Raynor. He is with the Southern Region of Workers United, gosh, and SEIU, and they've been a leading force in the struggle nationally to win $15 an hour minimum wage and the right to join a union among literally hundreds of and millions of low-wage workers. So welcome to the Labor Forum, Harris.
Thank you.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind giving us just a little picture about the role of the airport in the terms of how it helps keep wages low because of the number of workers that it employs.
Sure. Before I do, just let me take a second to thank you and Paul and WRFG and my brothers and sisters at the Teamsters for allowing this program to be here, one of the few outlets in the country, and
I think
certainly
there are 9 shows across the whole United States.
one of the few places in where the voice of working people and their representatives can be heard. We really appreciate the ability to be able to do that. So, our union, SEIU, has been involved in supporting a number of campaigns. I noticed that when Paul was talking, he talked about poverty level wages at $24,000 a year for a family of 4. That's $12 an hour on a 2,000 hour a year, which a lot of people don't work that many hours. But we have been calling for, in the fight for 15, to lift standards for all American workers to at least $15 an hour, which again, in a $2,000 hour a year would equate to $30,000 a year, and it is just above the poverty level, more like the 130% level. Certainly no great shakes, but we feel like by sparking a movement to do that on a national level, the only way we're going to do this is to raise the floor. And here in Atlanta, one of the key places where we have these kind of problems is at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, which is the biggest economic engine for the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia that we have. There are, according to the Hartsfield-Jackson website, 58,000 employees at Hartsfield-Jackson. That makes it the largest employer in the state, and those employees, the airport itself is a crazy quilt of employers. So some of the employees work directly for private employers like the airlines. Some of the employees work for the city. Some of the employees work for the airport itself. But a vast, vast, vast majority of the employees work for entities at the airport who get their work through what's called subcontracts. The airport and various entities at the airport put out proposals called RFPs, and these companies bid on those proposals every year. That includes the food concessions, or every couple of years. It includes the food concessions, the retail concessions at the airport, the cleaning at the airport, the parking at the airport, just, the shuttle bus drivers. I go on and on and on. And most of those contracts are simply contracts where the airport pays a company to manage labor. They're what we call labor cost contracts. The airport supplies the chemicals, the space, the equipment, and everything else. The contractor just manages its employees. And so what happens is everybody wins those bids by generally being the lowest cost bidder. It's not 100% of the case, but it's low cost that drive that bidding, which means how much can you oppress your employees? And we as unions, and I have our union represents a number of employees at the airports, we're put into this ridiculous situation where the better contract we can negotiate for our employees, the less competitive we're making the employer of those employees 3, 4, or 5 years later when that contract comes up to bid. And so we don't have any kind of standards. In 5 years, when the airport rebids a contract, every worker, if that contract is lost to their employer and goes to another, every worker sits there and wonders, am I going to have a job tomorrow? Is my salary going to be the same? Are my earnings going to be the same? Are my benefits going to continue? Am I going to lose medical coverage? Do I have to start over? Can you imagine being in that situation and having your life sit on tenterhooks like that all the time? And most of these people are starting out at minimum wage, which doesn't even pay you $15,000 a year compared to the numbers we talked about earlier. It's a crime. It should not exist in what is bragged to be the world's greatest and best airport. And the only way that it's going to be solved is if we set a floor and if we have contracting standards at that airport as well as in other contracted areas that I can talk about later. But unless we have a floor and unless we have rules that say, companies, if you want to bid for these contracts, provide a better idea, provide a better concept, run a better operation, but don't be the company that says, I can screw my employees more.
So this is like a two-prong campaign then, both to win a contract with the current holders of these concession contracts, but is it also then with the city or the airport management that they actually develop something that says, if you want this contract, you have to pay $15 an hour, you have to provide health care, you have to do, is that the deal?
We have to figure out which entities it is that we have to reach at the airport. There are, again, there's a private corporation called the Atlanta Airport Terminal Corporation, AATC. It subcontracts for maintenance and other things at the airport. That corporation is wholly owned by the airlines at the airport. So naturally, you know how airlines fight for every dollar as they're charging you for every bag and everything else, the toothbrush that you bring on the plane, right? The peanuts and all that. Well, they don't want this airport corporation to pay too much money. We have to look at the City of Atlanta and the City Council Transportation Committee, which lets the food service contracts and some of the others. We have to look at private employers like Delta and like the other airlines who contract out for wheelchair operators, contract out for people who clean the planes. There's one group of people that clean the airport. There's one group of people that clean the planes themselves, the people who clean the jetways and all that kind of thing. So the way that the state of Georgia has set this up, you've got to come at it from a number of different angles. But the principle has got to be the same, that we set a standard at the airport and we say, this is what we think is a decent living. This was tried before. When Shirley Franklin was the mayor of the city of Atlanta passed a living wage ordinance.
That's right.
The state of Georgia, in its infinite wisdom, then came down and said, no metropolitan area can do that anymore, only the state can do it. But we still think that certainly private employers have the right to do this. We still think that there are things that can be done at the airport, and how this campaign plays out is going to depend a lot on our union, other unions, and the employees there, and what we can do. But generally, it's going to be the flying public that really needs to support these workers making a decent living wage.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the action that took place at the airport this last week?
Well, this last week we had about 100 people who came to the airport. They included airport employees, although we were very careful to cover up their shirts and badges and who they worked for. But they included also fast food workers from the Fight for 15. They included home health care workers. They included people who have, well, they may work for different companies. They come from the same place. They come from the same communities. They face the same problems. And we have the same solution. We have got to raise standards. We've got to raise the floor. So we came to Hartsfield-Jackson not to disrupt the airport, not to deal with safety, but to talk about these workers, how they're treated, and what it means to the flying public. Because when you've got people who've got to deal with things like Ebola, who've got to deal with all of the safety issues that we face now, you don't want people who are working at minimum wage. You don't want people who are every single day looking for another job, because when you work at the airport, not only does it matter what you make, you got to get to the airport. The public knows what it costs to park at the airport. The public knows what it costs to get on MARTA. There's a tax on every one of those employees, a tax, TAX tax, that's basically their transportation to get back and forth to work. So when those employees are not paid some kind of a premium for being at that airport, then we get what we pay for. And we get people who are always looking to move to another job. The turnover in these jobs is enormous. The cost of turnover is enormous. The cost of retraining people is enormous. And this is a public safety issue. If we can't see that after the terrorist acts that we've just seen, if we can't see that after the panic that went through the city about Ebola, which, I think we all know was while it was a real live issue and panic to think about, our healthcare workers in this city handled that. We should be so proud of the healthcare industry, not demonizing them for what they did. But these employees are our first line of defense against that.
So, thank you so much for this update. Is there some way that our listeners can get engaged? Because you mentioned the flying public. Obviously, there are pressure points here with city council members and with a variety of other entities. Do you want to give a website or how people can support?
We have two different kinds of support that people can be involved in. There's obviously a number of your listeners are the people who are going to be affected by this in terms of being the employees, not just at the airport, but everybody who's working for less than $15 an hour and wants to get ahead of life and wants to move ahead. And some of those, by the way, are union members. They're people that we can't negotiate better for, because when we get them too high in earnings, then their companies lose business, and then they, unemployment is a lot less than that. So even as a union, we've got to be looking at this, and it affects our ability to negotiate the things we need to negotiate for our members. So number one, we have the employees who are affected. Number two, we have the public who is affected. And there are a number of activities, some of which I can't announce now, and some of which we haven't yet formed, that people should be paying attention to and trying to support workers. But what I want people to take away from this is to understand this is not just these employees' problem. This is not just a group of people looking for a handout. This is what kind of country, what kind of city, what kind of airport we're going to be, and what's the morality of where we live. If we can't reach out to people who are poor, then Dr. King, and some of you have been watching the news and seeing the little skits on Saturday Night Live about Dr. King's dream. Well, Dr. King's dream, as Paul alluded to, is nowhere near. We have a black president, or a partially black president, right? But we certainly have not achieved economic equality in any way, shape, or form. And the further income inequality spreads in our country, the less, not just black lives, but all lives matter.
Thank you so much, Harris.
Thank you.
So listeners, we will be right back. Please pay attention to this message, and then we'll bring our next guest onto the line here, and that is Senator Vincent Fort, and we're going to be talking about a series of pieces of legislation that could have some impact on police impunity. Thanks a lot for staying tuned here to WRFG. And thank you again, Harris Raynor.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Harris.
Welcome. We are back here in the Labor Forum on WRFG 89.3 FM in Atlanta. I neglected to mention that you can, of course, listen to this program and all the programs on WRFG online as well, at wrfg.org, and on your mobile devices, because WRFG has an app. And the Labor Forum also has a YouTube channel, and we video this program, and you can tune in and actually watch the program on the Labor Forum YouTube channel, and we invite you to do that. Also to like us on our Facebook page, and to contact us if you have any comments or you have some ideas for programs. The email is laborforumwrfg@gmail.com. Our second guest for the program here on Martin Luther King Federal Holiday Day is Senator Vincent Fort. Many of us may know Senator Fort from his legislative record. I actually know him more from marching with him and rallying with him at so many different events and occasions over the last,
Absolutely.
I don't know,
Many
25,
years.
30
Many
years,
years.
a long, long, long time. We invited Senator Fort to come on the program today because one of the big themes of today's march was the slogan that has echoed all across the United States of Black Lives Matter, in response to the number of police killings and other misconduct by police that have been exposed across the country. And this isn't something that's just come about in the last 6 months or so. This is a fact of life for people of color in this country since its founding. But Senator Fort, we invited him because we specifically want to talk about some of the legislative issues or bills that could come forward that would perhaps alleviate some of these things. So we know that you're working on that. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. First of all, let me thank you for asking me to be here, Diane. Not just for your activism in the street, but also for your commitment to communicating information people could not get anywhere else. So we appreciate you for both of those things. We have what we're calling a law enforcement reform package, several bills that we're going to be pushing this session at the legislature. And these bills come out of the grassroots efforts, comes out of FIRST, and comes out of what happened in Staten Island, comes out of the Trayvon Martin situation, comes out of the community's desire to change how law enforcement and the legal system deals with black people, particularly black males, in the street. So we've got a set of legislation, and although I do have a couple of priorities, we've got 5 or 6 pieces of legislation. The 2 priority pieces of legislation this session are reforming no-knock warrants. After the heinous attack on Baby Boo Boo in Habersham County, there's an outcry for reform, for changing how no-knock warrants are done. You know, the first real major impetus for revising no-knock warrants or reforming no-knock warrants came out of the 2006 murder of Katherine Johnston,
Right.
that I'm sure many of your listeners will remember. Katherine Johnston murdered by Atlanta police, renegade Atlanta police in 2006. I first introduced that bill in 2007. Interestingly enough, it did pass out of a very conservative Senate Judiciary Committee, passed out of the Senate, died in the House in 2008. We're back at it. I think we have even more of an impetus now after the Baby Boo Boo case.
And there are others who who have not gotten as
Absolutely.
much press.
Clayton County, but also in North Georgia, Macon, you know, where police have used no-knock warrants, gone into the wrong address in some occasions, in other occasions killed people who weren't even on the warrant, innocent folk that weren't on the warrant. The people that we're looking for weren't even at the home. So you're exactly right. It's not just in Atlanta. It happens in many places throughout the state. And so the no-knock warrant law, we're in the bill that we're proposing, we're asking for any number of reforms, raising the standard.
Let me just interrupt. I always want to make sure that everybody in our listening audience understands what we're saying when we're talking about a no-knock warrant.
A no-knock warrant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What does that?
Absolutely.
What does that mean?
A no-knock warrant is a warrant obtained by the police where they do not have to knock and announce. They can just go through the door.
Usually break it down.
Usually break it down, but go in unannounced, and you know, and supposedly it's done that way because they don't. It's really an advent of the war on drugs. The idea that if you were to knock and announce, drugs might get flushed down the toilet, or that the people inside the home would be able to use firearms. So it's that kind of legislation. It is exactly that, a warrant where you don't have to knock, you don't have to announce, you just go through the door. So what we want to do is make those more difficult to obtain.
Well, obviously, have more real evidence that it's necessary.
One of the things that
at this
we're
point,
gonna,
it seems like you just say
one of the things that we're going to do, you know, both in the Habersham County instance and the Katherine Johnston case, the police lied. One of the ironies of it's more than an irony in the Habersham County case. We know which officer lied. We know, as a matter of fact, that officer's resigned from the sheriff's department. And I'm putting my hand up to God. The grand jury chose not to indict because they said that they had been punished enough by feeling bad about almost killing Baby Boo Boo. But the fact, there's no doubt what happened. So in our bill, we're going to increase the penalties for an officer who lies to a magistrate judge in obtaining a no-knock warrant. We're going to call for training. We're going to call for protocols. But I think probably the most important thing is we're raising the bar. Right now, there's no standards for a no-knock warrant. And what we're doing is raising the bar and demanding that the magistrate require probable cause before awarding the no-knock warrant. So no-knock warrants is high on our list. And then the second issue that I wanted to talk about, I wanted to make sure we talked about, is the use of body cameras. Coming out of Ferguson, coming out of that situation, we are, gonna honor Michael Brown's parents' request. And Michael Brown's parents asked that that body cameras be demanded so that police officers can be on the record, be on film, be on video. It's not a panacea, but it's an important step in keeping, in holding law enforcement accountable out in the streets.
You want to mention some of the others?
Sure. I mean, we're going to come back with a bill, the Stand Your Ground repeal bill. So we're going to do that. We have a bill, and I know that people are going to be surprised to know that in the United States, not all deaths that result in police contact with the public are reported to anyone at any time. There's an executive order coming out of the Clinton administration in the 90s that require it, but enforcing executive action is an executive order by the president is very difficult. So what we're going to do is to require that local police agencies report deaths that result from police contact with the public, report those to the GBI. So we'll have at least, we'll know, I mean, it's just amazing, we don't even know, even as we sit here, how many people are shot,
Or hurt.
or otherwise injured when they come into contact with the police. So that's one of the things that we're going to do. There's going to be a bill to do away with racial profiling, one of the longest civil rights fights in the legislature has been over the issue of racial profiling. So we've got several bills. We're going to try to reform some of the gun safety stuff that the legislature passed in 2014. So we've got a full plate, and we're going to have a public hearing. And I want to make sure that I mention this up front. We're going to have a public hearing this Thursday at 7 p.m. at the state capitol, from 7 to about 8:30 p.m. And we're inviting the public to come out and be with us on this Thursday, January 22nd at 7 o'clock p.m.
Okay, we'll repeat that just one more time. So
Okay.
the public is invited to a
Public
hearing.
is invited to a public hearing on these issues of law enforcement reform legislation this Thursday, January 22nd at 7 p.m. room 450 in the Capitol. People are invited to come to listen and at this hearing and and bring the case to the Capitol. Bring the people's opinions, people's points of view to the state Capitol this Thursday at 7.
I want to ask you sort of more of a philosophical question, I
Sure.
guess.
Mhm.
So, the evidence that the Malcolm X grassroots movement has put together has, again, they searched all kinds of newspaper articles and to try to discover just exactly what you said, which is that there's no central place where the police are required of any kind of jurisdiction, sheriffs, counties, cities, localities, state police, whatever, to report when someone dies as a result of a interchange between the police and them. And so they had to search this out. They discovered that roughly every 28 hours in the United States, a person of color, mostly, as you mentioned, black males, but also Latinos and other people of color, are killed by either a police, somebody who's an actual police person, a security guard, or sometimes paramilitaries like George Zimmerman type. In other words, somebody who takes it upon themselves to be a watch person.
Sure.
So this movement that has been generated following the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, you and I have been at many demonstrations over the years when people have been killed by the police.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, quite often it doesn't last. The passion, the determination doesn't stay out in the streets for a considerable period of time.
Sure.
But it seems as though this movement now, what's being labeled Black Lives Matter movement, all across the country is reaching out, engaging more and more youth and other sectors, so that this phrase, Black Lives Matter, is really part of the, I don't know, part of our conversation. So I want to ask you about why you think that happened this time. Why Michael Brown and Eric Garner and some of the others, when we have seen others die.
Well, I think what you see is technology having an impact. I mean, with Trayvon Martin, it was black radio that was an organizing tool. Social media followed, but there was a black radio really boosted that movement. You know, it was until black radio started jumping on it. It was this kind of obscure case in Florida, and it became a national, international situation. And I think with Mike Brown, Eric Garner, I think social media brought it to another level. You know, even after Trayvon, in my opinion, even after the Trayvon Martin verdict, you know, the sustainability of that movement wasn't there. It was not a sustained effort. But there was also another difference. There was a substantive difference. I think social media made a difference, but there was a substantive difference in the Mike Brown case, and that was the family was giving specific directives to organize in the community. So I think there were a lot of things going on, but I think social media, to the extent that the youth, the Black Lives Matter movement is to a great extent a youth movement, where social media has been used in a way that it has not been before in these kind of movements. You know, 70 years ago in Harlem in 1935 or Detroit in 1943, when these cases of black men being shot down and people organized, there were rebellions in the street, it was black newspapers, you know, that was the focal point for organizing and communicating. But then, you know, in 2000s, black radio, social media, youth movements have brought this to a higher level, and I think you have a movement here that's sustainable, and that's why I've been as supportive as I can, particularly of Gen Y, X, and other organizations, Black Lives Matter, as they've organized over the last several months.
Senator Fort, we had Ajamu Baraka on a few weeks ago, and he spoke about the relationship between the militarization of the police that we saw in Ferguson and we're identifying as a national problem, and the relationship between that and our foreign policy, where we can have reports of torture from the CIA being revealed. What do you see in terms of the connection between systemic problems that we're dealing with here, that it's not just a domestic problem, but it's also part of our foreign policy that we have to address?
Well, and I appreciate you, that's a great question, and it's also a question that helps me to remember. I think the only piece of legislation, the only legislative initiative that I did not mention was efforts to kind of demilitarize the police here in Georgia, because the police here in Georgia, in local sheriff and police agencies, do the same thing that you saw in Ferguson, use or get equipment from the Department of Defense, whether it be, you know, I'm not even familiar with all the names, but tanks, automatic weapons, etc., to use against people who are protesting peacefully. I think there is a connection, a relationship between international, you know, the defense industry is very powerful. It's very powerful politically as well as financially, and you know, if they if they can't, if they have equipment that's not being used, or even if it still can be used, it's to their benefit to shift it to domestic use so they can get more
some
contracts
for some of the
for
newest, latest.
the newest, the newest and most efficient ways to kill people. So
it's a loop.
yeah, there's that relationship, a relationship between the domestic as well as the international uses of weapons that the arms industry produces. And so I think that is and we're looking into the demilitarization of the police. What we're trying to do, and that's probably the issue that we're less advanced on in terms of developing legislation. All the others we have legislation developed, but on that one we're trying to understand the administrative process. The use of military weapons or the adoption of military weapons in local agencies is not we didn't pass a law, the Georgia legislature didn't pass a law signed by the governor. It's administrative, and I believe it's controlled by the State Department of Public Safety. So we're trying to understand that administrative process as to how these arms get into in the hands of local police agencies. And the question is, when you look at Ferguson and you see tanks and you see
Clouds and clouds of tear gas.
clouds and clouds of tear gas and all that, it looked like, when I saw that, I said, boy, this looked like Iraq. It looked like something that in Afghanistan, it looks like an occupying army. And that gets to some of the kind of the
Right, the crux of the issue of
Yeah.
how people feel.
Yeah, and the when you have the police in Ferguson doing what they did, using the kind of weapons that they did, and all of that, what you really have is, from the community's perspective, an occupying force in the community. And so, I wrote an ed-op piece a month or so ago, and one of the points that I made is we not only need to change the laws. I'm a legislator. I go to the state capitol. We write laws. We try to pass them. But in addition, we have got to organize in our communities, because you can change all the laws you want, but there has to be a way to police, make our communities safe for people, and at the same time not be an occupying force. We're talking about real community policing. We're talking about jobs and education and all of those things in order to create a more just and a more just society, a more just Atlanta, a more just Georgia. Community policing, absolutely critical. If the Katherine Johnston case shows anything, it shows a lack of any appreciation for. Let me just put it this way: without the community as a partner with the police to do just policing, there will never be communities without this kind of adversarial relationships. Otherwise it'll just be occupation, as opposed to the police, the community cooperating together in real community policing.
Can I ask, there's so
Sure.
many other issues in relation to policing. Obviously, New York City had this infamous stop and frisk,
Stop and
where
frisk.
hundreds of thousands, mostly again, young men of color,
Mm-hmm.
Latino and Black,
Mhm.
would be stopped, put up against a wall, patted down, treated with disrespect. Almost, the percentage was almost nobody ever got arrested. It was just something. We've had so many people talk about, at the labor breakfast, for example, that the Central Labor Council had on Friday, the keynote speaker, who's now vice president of the AFL-CIO, is an Ethiopian man who migrated here, talked about how in the course of 1 year, he, as a student at a college, was stopped 15 times by police because he so-called fit a profile. This is really a huge issue that requires so many different voices and different kinds of work. I was just wondering if you wanted to even say your own personal experience.
Well, I mean, well, you know, you're not going to have an African American male on your program in front of this mic who has not been racially profiled in one way or the other. And sometimes racially profiled at the end of a firearm. I've had that happen to me. You know, but you know, we've got to create a Atlanta and a Georgia where the Constitution applies all the time to everybody. You know, we don't need you know, Bloomberg's New York stop and frisk policy. That was just the most onerous, the most egregious example, but we have the same policy here in Atlanta to one extent or the other, and that's why one of the things that needs to happen in the city of Atlanta is, and this is not on our plate, I am not taking this up legislatively, but one of the things that needs to happen as we put pressure on the City of Atlanta Police Department to do body cameras and to require body cameras throughout the state, we need to make sure that the citizen review board that's in place is not just what it is now. You know, the executive director is a good guy, he means well, but the fact of the matter is the citizen review board in the city of Atlanta is what? A paper tiger.
It has no power.
It has no power, and unlike in some cities, I mean, police departments, whenever they are proposed, police departments oppose them. But the fact of the matter, it's most successful in those police departments in those cities where the police buy in and realize that it's not designed to, you know, it's not anti-police, but it's a device that can help protect people's constitutional rights as well.
Well, thank you so much. Our time is up here at the Labor Forum. Again, remind
I
our
thought I had 2 hours.
we always need 2 hours.
No.
Remind folks that
Thank you
if
for
you are
having me.
interested in this issue, you can go to this public hearing this coming Thursday, 7 o'clock in the state capitol.
Yes, ma'am.
Room 450.
Room 450. And we'll be back next Monday. That is the 26th. That is actually also a day when there is a rally in front of the state capitol at 3 o'clock on this very issue. So we will try to bring you some news about that next Monday. This is Diane Mathewitz saying goodbye.
Thank you for coming, Senator Fort.
Anytime.
All right, and stay tuned to the next program here on WRFG.
All right.